Right, good evening, everybody. My name is Sally Mapstone. I'm the Principal and Vice-Chancellor of the University of St Andrews, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all to these 2019 general election hustings, to witness what I'm sure will be a robust examination of the candidates contesting the North East Fife constituency, which, as we all know, is the tightest marginal seat in the United Kingdom. The outcome of the voting on the 12th of December will determine the future of the United Kingdom and therefore the future of everyone in this room. Today, 10 days before we go to the polls, sifting through the constant stream of digital and print news, online advertisements, and postal flyers can seem a daunting task. However, deciding how to vote should not be an easy process, for it is vitally important that we take the time to ask questions, press for answers, and challenge what we hear in response. At the University of St Andrews, we equip our students with world-leading education in a variety of specialised fields. But so too does each student, over the course of their degree, develop the capacity to engage in critical thought and sophisticated academic debate. Whether students argue as members of the university's Union Debating Society, founded in 1794 and the oldest of its kind in the world, or merely amongst their peers over a particularly contentious point in a class, these skills form the foundation of a St Andrews education. It is vitally important to learn, to analyse, and to question, and no occasion puts these skills to the test in our national public discourse more than a general election. In this theatre, a mere 2-minute walk from Parliament Hall, in which the Scottish Parliament sat from 1645 to 1646, we now have the opportunity to question those who would represent us in the House of Commons, the individuals who will make decisions on our behalf and pass laws that will affect our lives. Debating relies on rhetoric, but when we're electing a politician, we need opportunities to test this rhetoric for substance. So tonight, roving microphones will allow you to pose your own questions to the candidates, which we will be able to see and hear them discuss. There is an old inscription over the gate to the former University Botanical Gardens on Queen's Terrace that reads, "They have said and they will say, let them be saying." At the university, we cherish freedom of speech and thought, particularly in the age of misinformation and fake news, and we are committed fiercely to defending these freedoms, even when we disagree with the ideas expressed. So tonight you are encouraged to air your views to our candidates without favour and to hear their views in return. And in the spirit of freedom of speech, I'm pleased to see the media taking an interest in our event tonight, and I would like to thank the Courier for their support. Some of you will have decided how to vote, some of you will decide based on what you see and hear tonight, and some of you will still be undecided when you enter the ballot booth on the 12th of December. Tonight's event presents you with the opportunity to inform yourselves about the matters that are important to you and will enable you to vote with conviction when the day comes. So I'd like to extend my thanks to all our candidates for setting their time aside in order to partake in this valuable democratic tradition. It's now my pleasure to hand over to our chair for this evening, the political editor of the Courier, Paul Malik, who will introduce the candidates. Thank you.
Thank you, Principal. Can I check, first of all, everyone can hear me? Correct. Thank you very much for inviting me to host this very, very important event for our democracy, especially, as the Principal mentioned, during this time of misinformation. Thank you very much for braving the pretty appalling weather and coming through and watching this in person. And finally, thank you very much for submitting all of your questions. We received between 30 and 40 of them. We have whittled them down. I'd just like to say that this is very much your hustings. So we are going to have your questions, not mine, not anyone else's. I will very quickly, very soonly open up the floor. I'll read out, if you've submitted a question to me over the last couple of weeks, thank you. I'll read out your name and where you're from and then present you to ask your question. If you decide that you do not wish to ask your question, I will happily read it on your behalf. I would now like to introduce our candidates. We have at the far right of the stage, standing for Labour, Wendy Haynes. To her left, we have the SNP candidate, Stephen Gethens. To his left, we have Lib Dem candidate Wendy Chamberlain. And finally, we have Conservative candidate Tony McClainsky. So without further ado, I'd like to go to Alan Wilson from Cooper. Is Alan in the house today? Stand up, please, Alan. Now, a microphone will be provided, so don't worry about orating. And if you'd just like to read your question out in your own time, Alan.
Yeah, sure. What comes first, your actual party or then your own personal integrity?
So that's what comes first, your party or your integrity? And I'm going to open that up to Wendy Haynes, please.
That's a very interesting question. I like to think I've chosen to belong to a party that reflects my own outlook and its policies are fully in tune with my own integrity. And I think that is pretty much the case.
Mr. Gethens?
Thanks. Well, my personal integrity would always come first in this regard, and I think you've got to be happy with your party. I'm lucky, like my colleagues, on this panel. I feel that I'm lucky in the party that I'm in. But one thing I have to say that's been striking during my time in the House of Commons, and actually there are really good and decent people in all political parties, are especially in the two bigger parties, the number of people who are finding themselves recusing themselves from the front benches or even recusing themselves from politics altogether. And that's something that I think should be concerning, because you want good and talented people to be involved in every single political party. Thank you.
Wendy Chamberlain.
So I would agree that personal integrity is absolutely crucial. Not only are you electing an MP to be your representative and individual, but you are electing them for a party as well. And again, I do firmly believe that my party is in line with my values, and I support that. And as Stephen said, there has been a number of people who over the course of the last Parliament have saw fit to either stand as become independents or move parties, and we have, as Liberal Democrats, welcomed a number of former Conservative and Labour members into our ranks, and I think that shows the kind of broad church that we are and the value-based principles that we have.
And finally, Tony McClainsky.
Integrity, personal integrity first and foremost. I'm a hopeless liar, as my wife tells me. It's always got to be what I'm believing in. Happily, my party and I are in sync. For example, I voted to remain when the referendum was held. I'm now absolutely convinced that, having had a referendum and a democratic result, that we have to honour that. It's one of the reasons that we're getting in such a state and wrapped around the axle about it. So I'm able to align myself and be perfectly comfortable with the Conservative Party, but for me it'll always be what I think first.
Thank you. Now, are there any supplementary questions from the floor?
Could I just ask
If I could get you to stand up, sir, so we can get the microphone. Thank you.
If he believes, if he believes in Brexit, and this constituency very solidly voted to remain, and indeed the whole of Scotland voted to remain.
Rubbish! A million of us didn't.
Huh?
A million of us voted to leave.
Yeah, but
If we could keep the heckling to a minimum, please, thank you. I had Mr Munro to answer his
rubbish
question.
isn't a constructive thing to say, sir, if you don't mind.
Mr Munro, please.
Voted to remain. That's a lie. Over 1 million of us.
Yeah.
Over 1 million of us
There was.
voted to leave.
If Mr Munro, if I could just pause for a second. I appreciate that this is a very emotional and passionate election, but our questions are for our candidates. They're not to be asked across the floor. So if we could please all respect that.
Correct. I think I get the gist of the question. If I could perhaps answer it.
If Mr Munro, if you would like to finish your question.
Will I try and continue?
Please do, thank you.
Okay, I think the democratic vote in Scotland was solidly in favour of Remain. And all I'm asking the Conservative candidate how he would feel representing a constituency who solidly voted for Remain. Thank you.
I've got no difficulty whatsoever with that, because if I'm elected, I'll be elected by the majority of this constituency. And I think people have to keep absolutely clear in their minds about the difference between referenda, between elections. The fact of the matter is, as the gentleman over there said, 36% of this constituency voted to leave. That doesn't invalidate what they said, it just means in that particular referendum there was a majority. If I'm elected, I will be elected quite clearly on two things. One is no further Scottish independence referendum, and secondly, we need to get Brexit sorted, because one thing I'm sure of, we're all sick and tired of the endless wrangling and rancour that has gone round and round in circles in Westminster for the last 3.5 years. It needs to get done, we need to move on, and we need to start growing some unity in this country.
Any follow-up questions? Let's start down at the front.
Thank you. Just on the subject of integrity, an interviewee on PM tonight described Boris Johnson as a bit of a rogue. I wonder whether the panel would agree that that is a fair and adequate description.
Mr Gethens.
I'd go a wee bit further than that. This is not personal to Tony in the slightest. This is directly to the leader of the Conservative Party, who I think is the least fit person to hold that office, certainly our lifetimes. I think we've seen in his remarks, in his casual...
If we could...
Well, you see, I think it's the normalisation of terms like traitor that gentleman used that Boris Johnson has to bear some level of responsibility for. And well, let me go one further. I don't think should ever describe anybody as a traitor. Each of my colleagues on this panel are good and decent people who have put themselves forward. And it's...
Excuse me, sir, I'm going to have to ask you to sit down. There will be plenty of time. If you would like to ask a question, raise your hand and we'll get one of the students to come down with a microphone.
I think you do yourself and your opinions no favour with that behaviour, to be honest.
Sorry, Miss Chamberlain, if you would like to answer the question, please. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, at Westminster, we're in a situation where politicians going to and fro of all political parties need a police escort to go and do political interviews so they can be held to account. And I've heard that kind of language down at Westminster, and it's not on. And I've heard Boris Johnson... And I've heard Boris Johnson, when we talk about... And I've heard Boris Johnson, when there are references to death threats, say Humbug. That was outrageous, and I'll say it again. He is unfit to hold the office of Prime Minister.
Wendy Chamberlain, would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, I think rogue is a light term. I was a police officer for 12 years, and when you look at somebody who's been sacked from jobs for lying, specifically for lying, who is unable to be clear in terms of his personal life, because I think there's some expectation when you put yourself into the public eye to become a political candidate that there is some level of scrutiny in relation to that, and who then sees fit to write articles about single parents and calling them sort of, you know, down the ladder of society when he himself has potentially created several single families seems quite difficult. And not only that, you know, Stephen's referred to the comments in terms of humbug, but that's just a litany. And quite clearly, you know, one of the things that I found really distressing this weekend is the incident that happened down in London over the weekend, where sadly 2 people lost their lives, has been absolutely politicised by our Prime Minister, and that is completely unacceptable.
Mr McClinsky, do you agree that Mr Johnson is a bit of a rogue?
He's certainly a character. Boris Johnson is not everybody's cup of tea, certainly not up here. Boris Johnson you're now seeing what you see is what you get. He said he's going to get us out of Brexit. Nobody said he could get a renegotiate the deal. He did. He is now standing quite plainly or getting us out of the European Union as upholding the mandate given to him in a fairly held referendum. And anybody who says, by the way, we lost, just remember the result of the 2014 referendum, which you also lost.
Yeah, we promised to stay in the EU.
That's absolutely irrelevant. Can I just... And I might as well make the point now that if only that were true, because when Nicola Sturgeon was asked recently if she would cancel her independence referendum requirements, which were raised solely on the material change of the European Union, she said no, she would still insist on it. So even if that is absolutely fact, my friend. When it comes to integrity and truth, I have to say I'm genuinely surprised at something. There's the SNP leaflets that have been delivered in North East Fife. Now, we all know what Nicola Sturgeon stands for, and if I offered you 2 words, it'd be a chorus of Scottish independence. Scottish independence first, last, always. And yet,
okay, Mr.
not
Kinsey,
a single mention of Scottish independence in these leaflets. Not one. And I just wonder, what's going on, Stephen? What's going on, Stephen? Are you trying to fly this under the radar?
Thank you, Mr. McClinsky. Thank you, Mr. McClinsky.
Something else?
Thank you.
You are Nicola Sturgeon's representative.
I can answer.
You are Nicola Sturgeon's representative in North East Fife. You stand for Scottish independence. Why don't your leaflets mention it?
Yes, Mr. Geffens, quickly.
Yeah,
quickly respond.
I'll make this very brief. I think Tony's trying to pull wool over people's eyes. Not only to the ones that you refer to Scotland's choice, but more fully the election address, which is the one thing the post office will send to every household, refers to independence. With a capital I, Tony. Read all the literature.
Not a word. Not a word.
Thank you.
Not a single mention.
Wendy Haynes.
I think the original question was about Boris Johnson.
Correct, yes. About being a bit of a rogue.
Who's a bit of a rogue. And I think some people have caught on to this idea that he's some kind of appealing rogue. You know? Didn't we all see him in the quiz shows and so on? But no, he's a charlatan and a liar. And we can't believe anything he says.
Thank you. Now we're going to move topic to climate change. Is Eva Groneveld in the audience this evening? Eva, if microphone. Thank you.
For the first time, I think, ever, this is a climate election. And by that, I mean the unprecedented level of interest and demand there is amongst voters for commitments on climate change, but also the importance of the decisions that the next representative for here and across the country, all these representatives, have to make really important decisions to make sure that we fix this. What is your party's, this is a question for all panellists, what is your party's biggest commitment on climate change? And what will you, as individuals, change in your lives over the next year, personally, to do your bit?
Wendy Chamberlain, if I could get you to answer first, please. Thank you.
Sorry, who was that?
Miss Chamberlain.
Oh, yep, myself. Okay, so I was at the climate strike protest on Friday, and thanks to the organisers for that, for inviting all 4 candidates along to give a précis of their party's policies. The Liberal Democrats, I think our manifesto, Greenpeace have marked it strongly. It's clear that we've got more to do, and I find it's interesting actually that some of the areas where we haven't scored so well, also the SNP manifesto had scored poorly in that, so it shows that on some of those things around farming and agriculture, oil and gas, that there's still absolutely more to do. But I think one of the very key things that we're doing, because it addresses and cuts across a number of things, is around our policy to insulate all homes in the UK. And a reason why I think that's important is because it actually helps across a number of areas as well. Because not only does it help the environment, but it also means people are warmer, and it also reduces heating bills as well. So when we are looking, as we come out of the austerity times, because a number of parties are looking to spend a lot of money, and we are looking at infrastructure investments, etc. as well. That is a key policy for us. But we're also looking at electric vehicles by 2030. We're also looking at how we achieve the 2045 targets and be ahead. And in terms of my own personal thing, I have to say one of the things I'm very bad for is forgetting my reusable cup. So my daughter has actually bought me one of those collapsible ones. It's now in my bag, and I commit to using that wherever possible and not using any reusable stuff again. And again, Scottish Liberal Democrats have championed the latte levy, as we call it, within the Scottish Parliament. So it's an area of focus for us.
Thank you. Mr. McLean-Skene.
So the Conservatives first and foremost believe that this is a global issue, that we've got to show leadership on the world stage. The emerging economies, plus the most polluting countries, China and the United States, they all need to be given an example, they all need to be shown the way to do this, and they need to do it urgently. So we have to influence the global issues. We're committed to the net zero emissions by 2045, to a 1.5 degrees centigrade rise above pre-industrial levels. We want to use getting out of the EU as an opportunity to get rid of the common agricultural policy, which does nothing to help farmers to focus on environmentally friendly way of farming. We have the urgency of this cannot be overstated. But one thing that I did really focused on when we were having our march on Friday was that we cannot break the economy while we're doing this. The economy is what is going to pay for the research and development and for the innovative solutions that are going to provide us with an alternative fuel policy and the technologies to get us out of this terrible mess that, frankly, my generation has made. So keeping the economy alive and kicking while we get on with this as quickly as possible is the twin aims of our policy.
Wendy Haynes.
The Labour Party has placed climate change very much at the centre of its manifesto. We've got a great green industrial revolution planned to concentrate on renewable energy sources, plans for wind farms. We've got plans to improve housing, improve the insulation in new homes and in existing homes, and the use of heat pumps and solar thermal energy. And we've got a fully costed plan to introduce these changes and provide everybody with grants or interest-free loans to improve their homes.
Who's costing it? Is it bad
There'll be plenty of questions to ask once Mr. Geffens is... if you would like to answer that question.
Yeah, of course. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say we've also got a transport policy which places emphasis on cycling and walking, and we want to improve the railways and get people moving around in a more energy efficient way and move towards net zero carbon by 2030.
Stephen Geffens.
Yeah, thanks for that. Eva, in the next Parliament, if you take the length of the Parliament, this is going to have to be number one priority. I think there are different ways you act at a national level. One of them is climate justice has to be built into the international development portfolio in a much more cohesive way. I have to say, when Tony talks about the economy being broken, well, if we don't deal with this, the economy is going to be broken, and we're already seeing climate change already. For the past 4.5 years, I've been the Vice Chair of the All-Party Group on Climate Change at Westminster, and that's been something that's been important to me. And I think that...
If everyone could bear in mind that there is a chance to ask a question, if we could just let the candidates speak first, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Paul. So I think there is more cross-party consensus on this that sometimes we actually give each other credit for. We saw that in 2009 when unanimously Scotland went to world-leading targets of 42%, which we've now almost met, but we need to go much further than that. In Scotland, we've almost reached the target of 100% renewables. That's great, but we need to roll that out across the UK. And I think the next big challenge has got to be on heat and transport. Insulation is one thing, but actually finding a way to get better heat and that move towards electric vehicles as well, because that's a big chunk of our energy use where we're failing. And finally, on my own stuff, we all need to do better on an individual basis. We're desperately trying to reduce the amount of packaging that we're doing, but I have to say supermarkets aren't great all the time, but they are getting a little bit better. And I think if we as consumers challenge the supermarkets on packaging, then that's a way to actually make a difference on an individual basis. Thank you.
Are there any questions on climate change from the floor? The chap down in the front here, please. Thank you. Just if you just want to wait for the microphone, just so we can all hear you.
I'd like to ask that climate change and the climate crisis is not only a domestic issue, but also a foreign policy matter. The UN has projected some 200 million climate refugees by mid-century, which will dwarf the numbers we've already seen create large-scale political instability across many parts of the earth. What would a 21st century climate foreign policy look like?
Wendy Haynes, if you'd like to answer first, please. Thank you. Wendy?
Which one?
I think you're right, we need to work together with other countries. It is definitely a global issue. The Labour Party is committed to working with countries on agricultural policies abroad in particular. Yeah.
Tony?
Yeah, it's really quite ironic that those countries that have contributed least to global warming are now suffering the most. We're going to have to look at a way of compensating these countries. We're going to have to find a way of helping them cope with the storms and the flooding that are now evident. We're going to have to work with them. There's only one way to save the planet, and that's globally. So I totally agree with the questioner. That's what I mentioned earlier, the leadership that we're going to have to provide, and somehow to convince the Americans, because let's not forget, I'm going to use the name, Donald Trump is not America. America is full of people who want to contribute to this agenda, and we need to provide the political influence to make that happen.
And Wendy Chamberlain?
Yeah, I think I think that's absolutely critical. I think that's where, as part of the UK, we need to use our influence within the G7. We need to put pressure on the US in particular, now that it's stepped back from the Paris Agreement, because absolutely, I think it's very important that, you know, Scotland and the UK has been leading on this for some time, and very proud that it was part of the Labour Liberal Democrat administration in the Scottish Government back in the last decade, and Ross Finney, who really worked to set those initial targets. But clearly, we are a small country in a big world, and so that's where I think our influence through the UN, through our G7 positions is absolutely critical. And yes, absolutely, pressure needs to be brought to bear on the US, but we are talking about islands today. I heard as I was coming in, an island today who basically will be underwater within the next 20 years if we don't start to act. My son is 12. We're saying we've got less than 11 years in which to make a difference. So there's an absolute incumbent responsibility on all of us and our country as well.
Thank you. Sorry, I jumped the gun a little bit. Stephen Gethens.
Thank you. Yes, it's a good question, actually, just as Wendy referred to there. You've got the UN summit in Madrid sort of being coined rightly as the last chance summit, and the President of the Marshall Islands, who was one of the openers today, making a really powerful speech. And that's why I mentioned earlier on, climate justice has to go at the heart of your foreign policy. I know a few years ago when the Scottish Government was the first one, and it was under the SNP at the time, to provide a climate justice fund. I think we need to roll that out across the UK. I remember that the work that was undertaken with President Nasheed of the Maldives, along with the Scottish Government as well, to put that at the heart, that those who have created the problem need to work with those who are most affected by the problem going forward. So with a climate justice fund, yes, that's financing, but I also think we need to be sharing technology and expertise. I think there's a huge economic opportunity in terms of the move to the green economy. But if we can crack things like tidal power, offshore wind power, but tidal power in particular, that could have a huge impact on countries across the world, and I think we need to be prepared to share some of that technology.
Thank you. We have an audience question from Sally Kilmister from Tayport. Thank you, Sally. If you just like to wait for the microphone.
Consensus from scientists is that extensive and radical action is required now to avert the worst effects of climate change. Current proposals have been shown to be too little, too late, and many plans exist that will worsen the crisis. Airport expansion, for instance, and new North Sea oil extraction licences. Most political parties and councils have now agreed there is indeed an emergency. Given that politicians are not experts on this issue and so should not reinterpret expert advice, I would like to ask the panel what emergency measures they plan to put in place to mitigate the climate crisis.
Thank you, Sally. Stephen Gethens, if you'd like to go first, please. Thank you.
Thanks. I think that's a fair point about expertise. I'm somebody who thinks we should listen to experts, and the experts have their place. That might not be the case across a House of Commons, but I think it's something, especially on this. One of the big things in this job is that you don't know everything about everything, you know, and you're dealing with a wide range of issues. So I think on the climate in particular, I think we do need to speed up in terms of our electricity mix and to try and decarbonise our electricity mix. I think we need to finance in terms of tax, but also in terms of more investment in terms of transport. We're making progress on transport, but we're a long, long way from actually cracking that, because electric cars are still incredibly expensive, but hopefully you can make that leap to make them cheaper and more available as well. So I think that investment in research and technology, and look, and I know that we're going to open this up in a moment, but our most effective tool in targeting climate change and pooling and sharing our resources has been with our partners elsewhere in the European Union. You know, that's the... So, I know we'll come to it, but we've got 6 weeks after this general election till the next Brexit deadline, and that's got to be a real priority. Climate change should be the priority. I wish I'd spent as much time debating climate change over the past 4 years as I have spent debating Brexit.
Mr. McLean, Tony.
Well, I haven't got too much more to add. We've always had a science, evidence-based approach to this subject. Politicians, you're quite right, they can provide the leadership, but we need to listen to our scientists. There's been a lot of denial going on. I think the case is now irrefutable. I think that's been accepted by all and sundry. The question is how we get from where we are now to where we need to get to. And I'm afraid I wouldn't be fair to the discussion if I didn't emphasise that we cannot just do a leapfrog. We can't just jump there. We have to. There's a journey to get there. And that means that we have to keep our economy alive, because if we start taking actions like, for example, let's turn our back on oil and gas, turn our back on the North East and Aberdeen, if we do that instead of using that to turn them into a key base for the decommissioning of oil rigs and for the transition to a low carbon or zero carbon economy, we have to do this realistically. Warm words ain't going to do it. We have to do it in a way that works, and that means that our process and our people's jobs, employment, have to be maintained while we're getting on with this.
Thank you. Wendy Chamberlain.
So yes, we absolutely should be listening to experts, and we should be utilising them. I think in terms of our crisis, it's quite clear that we need to be showing political will across all areas of government. So for example, I'm very proud that from April next year, I'd like it to be sooner, but Fife Council will be having an environmental impact assessment into any of its kind of policy decisions, and that came about as a result of the Liberal Democrats. So it is about so we're talking about big shifts that we need to make overall, but that requires, and it goes back to your question earlier about what we're doing as individuals, that requires shifts in all of us, and that means that at local government, at national government and at UK government, as well as our global politics, that we need to be making and taking actions now. I think a very interesting point there is in terms of, Tony's talking a lot about the economy there, but there's absolutely things that we can be doing in financial services or looking at the investments, and we've proposed that in our manifesto, where we have an expectation of cleaning up the financial system and holding them to account for the investments that they are making and ensuring they're being done in an ethical and principled way.
And Wendy Haynes.
We're sitting in a university town with a very well-respected research university, and we need to listen to our researchers, we need to listen to our scientists, who are telling us what we're doing to the environment. I've already mentioned that Labour has this Green Industrial Revolution plan. We want to put money into developing new forms of technology to harness natural energy. And that is a central part of what we're doing. And we want to work in partnership with researchers, with scientists, with engineers to achieve zero carbon energy.
Thank you. Now, we're going to move on to our next topic. I understand that it is passionate and that tempers can run high. If I could just remind everyone, please, to respect the people asking questions and respect our candidates. And if you have a question, please put your hand up and we will do our best to answer the candidates will do their best to answer your questions. This is on Brexit, and I have Tara Roberts from Tayport. Sorry, Tara, if you just had to wait for the microphone. Thank you.
So obviously, Brexit is a big issue in this election, been talked about a lot, lots of different views. But however, one group of people whose views on this have just been really very widely ignored and not mentioned is those of us who didn't get a vote in the 2016 referendum. Thank you. And this includes those like me who are too young to vote but are now of voting age, as well as EU citizens living in the UK, and the current generation, thank you, and the current generation of 16 and 17-year-olds who, and if elected, will you support or even introduce a bill for an EU referendum which also gives a vote to these groups and puts right the fact that the first referendum didn't give a vote to these groups?
Thank you for your question, Tara. If I could pass that on to Wendy Chamberlain, please, first of all.
So I absolutely agree that there were many issues with the 2016 referendum. and our position is very clear within our manifesto. We absolutely support votes at 16. And we absolutely support votes for EU citizens who have lived in our country for more than 5 years. I suppose it goes back to American revolutionary times, no taxation without representation. And for example, the group, the 3 Million, have done a great job of highlighting the injustice in many ways that EU citizens, who are the group who in many ways are going to be most impacted by the decision and the implementation of Brexit from 2016, they are some of the most impacted. So, my answer to you is absolutely yes. I find it interesting that Tony was talking about getting Brexit done, because we all know that this is just the beginning. That if the Prime Minister, if Boris Johnson gets his way, we will leave at the end of January, though he did offer to die in a ditch at the end of October if we didn't leave, and we see that hasn't happened. But by the end of January that we potentially leave. But the reality is that is proposing that we do a free trade agreement. And again, come back to Tony saying that he negotiated a different deal. He negotiated a deal that was even worse than the deal that Theresa May negotiated. The simple fact of the matter is there is no good Brexit outcome. It leaves Britain poorer economically. And, as politicians here, our job is to represent, and a lot of the job of representing is to assist our constituents who find themselves in difficulties. And all this is going to do is to put more people into difficulty. So absolutely, we are totally committed to a people's vote. Looking at Labour, that is their position that they have now moved to, that they support a people's vote. They had 17 opportunities to vote for one in the last Parliament, and they failed to do so. You can vote for a direction.
Thank you, Wendy.
Vote for a direction of travel, but when Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage cannot agree on what leave looks like, I believe it is legitimate to ask people again once a clear direction of travel has been given.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you. Tony, if I could get you to come in on that, please. Thank you.
Well, I think it's absolutely, frankly, disgraceful that the Liberal Democrats have cancelled Brexit. We had a democratically held referendum. More than 17 million people voted to leave. And the reason, and I sympathise with our young friend over there, but these were the rules of the election at the time, the referendum at the time. The simple fact is, our politicians in Westminster have wrapped themselves around the axle. They have paralysed this government. We have done nothing but agonise over Brexit for 3.5 years. Everybody has their own personal, perfect version of it. And it is impossible to get a consensus, which is why we're having this general election. The only way out of this now is to get on with it. If you want to have years more dithering and delay, if you want to return a hung parliament where Jeremy Corbyn, who knows what he actually thinks and what he's going to do, the Liberal Democrats.
If we could allow Mr. Kunsky to finish, I'm sure he will answer the question in due course.
Which bit of the question am I not answering, sir? I said already, because there are rules. The rules were what they were at the time, and that's how we voted. In some future government, we might have 16, but right now we don't. The point you have to remember is 3.5 years already. If we go back to it, it's more division, it's more rancour. We have to get past this for, frankly, national preservation. We're making fools of ourselves. Get on with it and start to grow some unity in this country.
Thank you, Tony. If we could pass that to Wendy Haynes, please.
Yes, we're going to have another referendum, which you will be able to vote in. I think we're the only party who's guaranteeing you another chance to vote on Brexit. I would say it's going to be a far better referendum than the last one. That's probably not difficult. It's going to present a reasonable, sensible deal that Labour is going to negotiate to exit the EU but keep benefits for the environment, benefits for working conditions, and benefits for trade. And then we are going to put that before you to vote to either leave or to accept the deal. Sorry, accept the deal and leave or remain.
Thank you, Andrew. And Stephen.
Yeah, well, Tony talks about the rules on the EU referendum. I put down in my own name, which was backed by colleagues in other parties, in the EU referendum bill almost 4 years ago, that 16 and 17-year-olds could have the vote and EU nationals could have the vote. And when I talk about EU nationals, these are our fellow citizens who've got a different picture on their passport. And the Tories rejected it. Well, Tony, when you talk about the rules, these were the rules that you voted against. You chose to remove those people from the electoral mandate for that particular election.
The rules that applied at the time.
And I'll say this, and you're quite right to raise the issue of young people. When I was choosing my university, I remember choosing it thinking about what are the Erasmus opportunities. And I did Erasmus. And it opened up educational and training opportunities. And then furthermore, I benefited from freedom of movement that others do. Now, why on earth should I vote to pull the ladder up behind me and take away opportunities from young people that I have enjoyed? Surely in this day and age, day and age,
I'm going to say again, there will be plenty of chance to ask questions. If I could ask the audience member to sit down, please. Please. And we can
in this day and age,
get the answer.
Surely it's the role of politicians to expand opportunities for young people and not take them away.
If you have a question, please put your hand up and we can get to you.
Do you know,
Stephen, if you'd just like to wrap up.
Can I conclude? Okay. And the final thing is, and I'm sorry to say this to Wendy, I've been voting for that second referendum on the EU for a long time. I spent a lot of time and couldn't see many Labour MPs in the corridor with me when I voted on it. I saw some of my Lib Dem colleagues, I saw my Plaid Cymru colleagues, but we didn't see a lot of Labour colleagues until very, very late in the day, and I'm sorry to say that. Thank you.
Now, if anyone has a question from the floor, if you'd like to raise your hand, please. The lady in the pink shirt down the front.
My question is about the NHS and how the Tories are quite willing, out of Brexit, want Brexit done so they can deal with Donald Trump and sell our NHS to America so we can't have the treatments that we have. There is a Section 7 legislation, I do believe, which says that Donald, would you call his man, shut your mouth. Shut your bloody mouth.
If we would allow the audience member to ask her question, please. Thank you. Thank you.
I will ramble. I've been listening to you all night.
Can we?
There's a Section 7 that indicates that at any time that Boris Johnson can take our NHS down and be ruled from Westminster. Yet the Scottish NHS is performing way better than any other NHS in the whole of the UK. And what right do they have to do that?
So can you get to finalise your question? What was your question? Sorry.
Well, you would be able to hear if this idiot would stop talking.
I appreciate that. If you ask a question, so I can ask the candidates, please.
I'm asking the candidates, do they think it's appropriate that the Tories can just come and take Scottish powers because they want to sell them to the Americans doing trade deals after Brexit?
Mr McClinsky, would you like to come back on that one?
I don't know where to start with that one. First of all, the NHS is not for sale. It's not for sale to the Americans.
Excuse me.
Madam, if you're going to ask the question, be decent enough to listen to the answer. Would you please set a better standard? Thank you. It is not is on anybody's agenda, not Boris Johnson's, not the Conservatives, to sell the NHS to anybody. We support it. We're going to put £3.4 billion more through Barnett consequentials of the Scottish budget so they continue to improve on the pretty dire state of the NHS and social care in this country at the moment. So it is not for sale. But by the way, if the point is about using a mixed economy and allowing some privatisation into the NHS, we already do that. About 7% is already privatised, things like physiotherapy, and they work extremely well. And where we get a better bang for our buck, which allows us to provide a good or better service for the same amount of money, then we'd be stupid not to take advantage of it. But to be absolutely clear again, it is not for sale. That is, the Labour Party waved around a 450-page document which shock horror showed that trade officials had been discussing future trade. That was all. It is absolute nonsense.
Thank you. Wendy Hayes, would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, I'd say the NHS is very safe with Labour. Unlike the Conservatives, we're not interested in getting bangs for bucks.
Oh, really? Really?
We will ensure that we leave the EU with a good deal that guaranteed that keeps our trade deals with the EU, that will not make us dependent on trade deals with America. The Conservatives will lay themselves open in the event of the deal that they're proposing, which amounts really to no deal at all. They will lay themselves open to very aggressive bargaining from the United States, which will inevitably include the NHS, will include price hikes for drugs, and the Labour Party is guaranteeing that we will keep control of the NHS. We will, where possible, reverse the privatisation that has occurred. We will properly fund the NHS. And will properly fund social care. It's vitally important that the NHS is integrated with social care. We're not interested in only building hospitals. We're interested in keeping people out of hospitals by caring for them properly in the communities, by promoting health in our communities. That is the only way to make sure that we can keep people well.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you. Stephen, if I could ask you to...
Yeah. At the very start of this discussion, there was a very good question from the gentleman upstairs about integrity, and it took us into Boris Johnson, if you trust him. I don't trust Boris Johnson, and I especially don't trust him when it comes to potentially making a deal with Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump has already said that everything, including the NHS, is on the table. And because I don't trust Boris Johnson's integrity, the best way to tie his hands is through legislation. So in the SNP manifesto, we've proposed, and I hope that my colleagues from the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party would support this, and I suspect they will, an NHS protection bill, so that even if the Tories get back, there is no way that they can do a dodgy deal between Johnson and Trump. And I'm sorry, I don't question Tony's personal integrity, but I do not trust the leader of his party, and I do not trust the NHS in his hands.
Thank you, Stephen. And Wendy Chamberlain, if you'd like to...
Yeah, I would echo Stephen's comments there in relation to trust and integrity. One of the whole reasons why this ongoing debate about the NHS not or being for sale or up for sale is because it's got to the stage that we can't believe anything that our Prime Minister says. And as a result of that, and I think this comes back to the topic that we're discussing here, which is Brexit, both the Conservatives and Labour are committed to delivering Brexit. And as we know, there is no deal that is better than the one that we currently enjoy. So when we have left the European Union and we're in a weaker state, it's not surprising that bigger countries like the US, who, I mean, Donald Trump is always in for a deal, means that people will potentially Well, the IFS says that any deal leaves this country poorer, leaves the UK poorer economically. You may not believe that, but I think we have accepted that we agree with experts, and the experts are saying it leaves us poorer. So as a
Excuse me.
that,
I've said it again. If you have a question, put your hand up and we can ask the question. If not, please allow the candidate to finish.
Yep. So as a result of that, it is of no surprise to anybody that potentially is the UK, because no other country deals in WTO regulations, which is what we say we're going to do. And then we had our previous International Trade Secretary who said that the EU deal we were going to do would be the easiest in history, and Liam Fox left the stage delivering no trade deal. So as a result of that, unsurprisingly, many things may be on the table. And given that we can't have trust in our Prime Minister, unsurprisingly, we don't believe that that's going to be the case.
Thank you, Wendy. The gentleman at the back with his hand up, just right beside you.
Sorry, this is going to seem rather petty. I'd just like to introduce this gentleman over here, Mr. Dunbar, I believe, who's the ex-member of the British National Party. Who, perhaps more to the point, isn't local.
Please, if I could remind everyone that this is questions for candidates, and candidates only. Next question, please. Excuse me. You're not a candidate in this. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we can take the question. Gentleman at the back there.
I'm somebody who has the National Health Service.
Sorry, I can't.
So is it? Okay.
I don't know. Could you just talk straight to this?
To thank the National Health Service for being here. Okay. And I've purposely looked at the redacted documents that they deny exist, and it actually says this. The USA reserves the right to withdraw all trade, aid and communication upon the non-compliance of the UK to allow open discussions about the sale of all assets within the partnership within the National Health Service. So
Was it just a statement you wish to make? Do you have a question, sir?
My question was that they said it's a lie. It is not a lie. This is part of the redacted document before you are actually putting through. So deny that.
I have no idea what you're waving, but I deny it categorically. I will deny it because what you're doing, and by the way, what my colleagues here are all doing, is using this "we don't trust Boris Johnson" mantra to avoid their own weakness in their arguments. The fact of the matter is that no deal has been struck with the United States. No deal has been. We're still members of the European Union, my friend. We are not allowed to negotiate deals yet, or have you not noticed that? Look, anything that you're showing me and showing the rest of us can only be the preliminary to the real negotiations which will take place downstream. There's no point, for goodness sake, keep your wits about you. There's no deal being struck. There will be negotiations across a wide range of issues with the Americans and with the rest of the world.
Thank you.
I beg your pardon?
Thank you. The gentleman down in the front of the green jacket.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps can I introduce another topic, and that's of transport policy. I speak as someone who has spent the last 7 years of my life in a campaign to reinstate the Leave-Mouth Rail campaign, and one of the things that I learned was that both at Westminster and at Holyrood, transport policy, planning and strategy is an utter shambles. I'd like to invite the candidates to tell me what they would do to improve a situation whereby projects don't happen, there's no clear vision of what kind of transport system we want, and no one seems to know who's responsible for doing which bit of it. Thank you.
Mr. Gethens.
I think it's a fair point. Eugene, you guys did an amazing job on the Leavenmouth Rail Link, and it was a privilege to be able to stand with you a few weeks ago when it was announced that that project was going to be taken forward. I think we need to have a broader look at this. I think one of the benefits, and it's something that you pointed out in Leavenmouth Rail, was the social impact and the way that that would impact people who are in poverty, as well as the carbon emissions that would take away as well, and that became an equally important area. I think we need to fully devolve rail. Let's give the entire responsibility to one government. But I also think that if you need a more joined up approach, I mean, one of the areas in Europe when you have pan-European networks in terms of roads and railways and elsewhere does help too. I actually also think that if you're going to have high-speed rail and therefore take people off of planes and put them onto railways, you should have started from Edinburgh rather than doing the most difficult bit of it, and that was to start from London to Birmingham.
Wendy Chamberlain.
You're right, and there's a lot to learn, especially from the campaign that you and your colleagues ran so effectively.
Thank you, Stephen. Wendy Chamberlain. Sorry, Wendy Chamberlain. Sorry.
Yes, we've got a 50-50 female to male split, but we've also got 50-50 Wendy's. So yes, it makes, and it's not a very common name, but anyway, it's. Thank you. So yes, we were fully supportive of the Leavenmouth Railway campaign, and I think it will be a huge boon for the local economy there. And you know, to think about the transport opportunities to take people into the Central Belt, and it comes back into our climate change discussion that we had earlier as well, in that we must make a radical change of moving people away from cars and into public transport. So I think there's a transport hustings on Wednesday evening in St Andrews, and we have been asked, all the candidates, to sign a pledge in relation to what we'd make in terms of an investment into better transport. And as Liberal Democrats within our manifesto, we have committed to increasing to 10% of the transport budget into better cycling, walking, etc. But what we've also committed to do is to make a really transformational investment into electrification of trains and into other forms of transport, so we decarbonise transport as well. But I think there's lots of learnings to be had. I mean, I know that the Leavenmouth campaign linked in with the Borders Railway, and I know that all those other groups are linking in together as well, and there's clearly lots more to be done, because it's not just about the transport strategy, but it's also about changing people's behaviours as well, so that the default option becomes a public transport option as opposed to utilising vehicles.
Thank you. Wendy Haynes.
Labour's very committed to the railways. We plan to renationalise the railway network, which in itself I think will bring a much more joined up approach to improving the railway network. We also plan to reduce fares and make fares fairer and have free travel for young people on the railways. I'm delighted that the Leavenmouth extension is going ahead. Also very interested in the campaign to have a Newborough railway station, and indeed to reopen a link into St Andrews. So yeah, very keen on improving the railway network.
Thank you. And Tony.
Well, I'd like to add my congratulations, Eugene, to getting the Leavenmouth Rail Link. I think that was supported, frankly, by everybody. A great achievement, and I have to say, long overdue, because it took an awfully long time to get there. Which pretty much summarises the SNP's record on this. The Queensferry crossing, for example, supposed to be completed. Well, listen to the facts, folks. Listen to the facts. Supposed to be completed in 2016, still not done. The delays on the management of infrastructure in this country are shambolic. I would also ask people to remember, for those of you who are old enough, what it's like under nationalised programmes. The Labour Party wants to nationalise rail, mail, the water, and so it goes on. Do you remember what it was like when the dead hand of socialism ran things and nothing actually worked? To go back to that now is retrograde and extreme, and frankly will leave this country in a shambles.
Thank you, Tony. The lady down at the front here, please. Thank you.
Don't listen to those socialists that are talking nonsense.
If we could quiet, please. This lady has a question.
Hello. Yes, just talking about local transport. The local private bus operator, Stagecoach, is currently cutting services, and in particularly they're reducing the number of buses at key times for commuters, as well as scheduling which conflicts with the standard 9-to-5 working day. So, and obviously we all know that the bus service is vital for people to get to work, education, medical appointments, etc. If elected, what will you do to ensure that private companies must provide these essential services?
I'll pass it over to Tony, please. Thank you.
To
yourself, sir.
So you can't force people to do things when they're going to make a loss unless the taxpayer pays for that loss. The word profit has become a bit of an evil word, especially in the Labour lexicon. If we employ private companies, they have to be able to make a profit, otherwise they go under. The same is true in transport, the same is true in social care. It's a fundamental misunderstanding. So the contract where we have to get the right services to the right people has to be paid for. And one of the challenges, of course, is that we desperately need bus services, particularly in the rural environments of places like North East Fife. But the numbers using it are relatively small, and the ability of bus companies to make a profit therefore depends upon subsidy. So it all depends upon how you're going to spend the taxpayer's pound to get that service. But to have a functioning railway, to have a functioning public services and functioning bus services is absolutely critical. But they do have to be paid for.
Wendy Haynes.
I live in Cooper, and I know that the people of Cooper were quite upset when a bus was taken off, I think about 18 months ago now, which used to run from Nine Wells in Dundee and came through Cooper and went down to Kirkcaldy to the Victoria Hospital. So it was great if you're going to hospitals. I myself moved to work at the Victoria Hospital around that time. I was looking forward to using the bus to get to work, and that privilege was taken away from me. I'm very aware of how important bus services are, especially in relatively rural areas like North East Fife. The Labour Party is very aware of that too, and would be keen to finance bus services, to subsidise bus services as necessary to enable people to get around in rural communities and to get access to work, to hospitals by environmentally friendly means.
Thank you, Wendy. Stephen?
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's something that's taken up quite a lot of my work. People often overlook that mobility and poverty are not things that are restricted to urban areas. There's a huge amount of rural poverty, and rural mobility becomes quite important. And it's actually where, and you won't be surprised, I would disagree with Tony in that sometimes on these rural links, actually it's not just about profit, it's actually about having joined up cohesive bus services that can tie into rail services as well. And we always do, but I know during my time, sometimes we're successful when it happens. Actually, interacting with your local MP is the most important thing. And I know, for example, we managed to get some reintroductions in terms of the Letham connection with Nine Wells that became important. I know in Newborough with some of the connections into Perth were just daft for people. So sometimes the bus companies, it's a difficult job, there are 100 communities in North East Fife, and I'm not saying it's easy, but sometimes the bus services need to listen, and actually as the MP it's something that sometimes you have to listen as well, because they don't always get it right, and they sometimes react, but we need to invest. It's something that's really important, not just for transport, but in terms of people's economic well-being as well.
Thank you, Stephen. And Wendy.
Yes, absolutely. I think investing in transport is important, and it shouldn't just be about profit. We're talking here about the changes we need to make in terms of climate change and in terms of transport strategy, so surely it's important that we maintain our local services as a result of that. And were I to be elected, I would be listening to constituents, I would be working with the local team of Liberal Democrat councillors, so Councillors Tim Brett and Johnny Tepp in Tay Bridgehead, worked very hard to replace a bus route that had been cancelled and bring it back online, and that's the kind of thing that we need to do, and we need to ensure that that investment's there. I think the other part of it is as well is that yes, we need to have that connectivity, but it's also a broader question about what local services that we have. So a very good example there would be the GP out of hours service. Yes, there might have been transport links to go to Kirkcaldy or Nine Wells, but the fact that we've been able to maintain a service in St Andrews means that it's much more local for people, and that's really important.
Thank you. One more question. We have the lady in the red glasses down there. Thank you. No, sorry, Eva. It's just the lady behind her. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. It's not really a question. I'm just absolutely astonished that the Conservative candidate, Tony, had made an excellent case for nationalisation of public services so that they serve the people and not for private profit.
You obviously don't remember it.
We move on now. We've done the transport questions earlier, so that's good. We move away from Brexit and transport to that other nice, calm topic, independence. If we could have Alistair McBain from Falkland, please. Is Alistair McBain here? Oh, he's up at the top, sorry.
I guess my question isn't necessarily aimed at independence, but it does impact horrendously on Scotland. I wondered what the panel's opinion on wasting £200 billion on a Trident replacement would be, and if there could be a better use, perhaps, for that amount of money.
Wendy Chamberlain.
So very much I want to live in a world where we have no nuclear weapons, but we also know that we're in a globally unstable world currently as well. We have Putin, and we've got levels of interference potentially in the election that's happening right now, and it would be nice to know if the government had chosen to publish that report but and tell us more about that. But as a result, I think our position is that we believe in a minimum deterrent while we look to step down the nuclear ladder. We want to be in a place where that isn't the case at all. But what I would say in terms of 200 billion is that is the biggest figure possible that's being quoted there. That is in relation to the lifetime of maintaining the Trident system. Our own view is we want to reduce the number of boats that are patrolling, and we want to do that in a different way. So I don't think there is an easy answer to this. It is very easy, to sort of say ban, and I think that's easy to say if you're thinking about an independent Scotland as opposed to a UK that's part of NATO. But absolutely, we want to be minimising the cost that we spend on anything like this, and that's our current position.
Thank you. Stephen?
Yeah. The biggest security threats that we've faced in recent times were as a direct result of the failure and the aftermath, and it was in the aftermath of the Iraq and Libya conflicts. The Iraq war under Labour and the Libya conflict under the Conservative and Liberal Democrat administration. And one of the things that we didn't do there was we didn't invest in stabilisation. And if you look at Bosnia and elsewhere, you'll see that it takes a long period of stabilisation. Iraq was destabilised. That contributed to Syrian destabilisation as well. We never invested in civil society. We never invested in building peace. And war is much, much, much more expensive than peace. That's a foreign policy failing, and the intelligence failings and the disinvestment in the Foreign Office have led to that subsequently as well. Trident does not meet our foreign policy challenges. Trident does not make us any more secure. And we sit not that far away from where the Lookers Air Base was closed, whereby we've got one of the lowest footprints in Scotland in terms of Ministry of Defence spending. Yet we're about to blow £200 billion on Trident. And I'm sorry, Wendy, The £200 billion comes directly from the MOD. And when I was last standing for election, when I was first stood for election 4.5 years ago, the figure the MOD gave was £100 billion. Now that's gone up quite significantly, and I wouldn't be in the slightest bit surprised if it goes up again. And at a time when we're cutting public services, you know, I remember the bumper sticker that was used, "Bairns, not bombs." Let's invest in our public services.
Thank you, Stephen. Tony McClinsky.
Could I ask the question repeated, please?
The question, yes, of course. It's going to pass on to Tony first, but the question is, do you think 200 billion used for Trident could be better spent?
So, some clarity on the numbers. 200 billion is probably costed over a 50 or 60 year period. The actual procurement cost of the system itself is about 31 billion. Why are we spending such a sum of money? Because there is only one reason that nuclear weapons have only been used once in the last 75 years, or once at all. And that is because of the nuclear deterrent policy. No one dares use them because of the fear of reprisal. That is an insurance policy, ladies and gentlemen. It's an insurance policy that's worked for 75 years. Is there anybody in this audience who really thinks it would be a safer world if all the Western democracies, because frankly, if you're saying we've got to give it up, the same would apply to the other democracies, that if all the Western democracies gave up their nuclear weapons, that the world would be a safer place? When Russia, a resurgent Russia and China and Pakistan all have nuclear weapons, with Iran and other countries like them trying to get them, does it really make sense? A Prime Minister's first job is to protect the nation. His first priority is to protect the nation. And Nicola Sturgeon's view that nuclear weapons are immoral. Well, the Holocaust was immoral, but it happened. It happened. We cannot ever allow a nuclear war to break out. We have had one successful policy for 75 years, and that's rested on the deterrent capability. The United Kingdom is part of that, and we should remain until we're in a position where verifiably every single nuclear weapon is removed from all states, and that's the only time we should give them up.
Thank you, Tony. Wendy Haynes.
The £200 billion, a lot of money. We could all think of better things to spend it on than weapons. But in the current situation, the Labour Party is supporting ongoing Trident investment. But we're very, very committed to multilateral disarmament in the long term, and to working within NATO to reduce nuclear weapons.
Thank you. We have a question from the gallery down at the front there. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Millie. I'm from England, might be able to tell. I came to Scotland to study at the University of St Andrews, and I'm now in my third year of studies. I would love to go on and do a master's or perhaps a PhD and really get into academia. My understanding was that during the years where we were ruled by the dead hand of socialism, people were being offered grants to study at universities. However, in my 4 years at St Andrews, I will be leaving with £73,000 worth of debt. This seems ridiculous to me. So my question to all of the panellists is, how will your party personally look out for me, the student who doesn't want to be into crippling debt, but wants to have a career in academia?
Thank you. Stephen, if you could respond to that, please. Thank you.
This is a really good point. Actually, today I was speaking to some of the strikers outside the UCU strikes round about the university, and they made a really good point today about the striking in terms of the increasing casualisation. And not only is that problematic in terms of your career, but when you're leaving with £73,000 worth of debt, it makes certain jobs increasingly unaffordable. So one of the first things that the SNP did coming into power was to scrap tuition fees. Is that in Scotland we very much believe that education should be on the ability to learn rather than the ability to pay, and that will continue.
Tony, if you'd like to come on that, thank you.
Yeah, wouldn't it be great if we could have free education for all? Because I, for one, absolutely committed to nothing. I went to Ancram Road Primary. I went to Harris Academy in Dundee. I went to Dundee University. So, my friend, you're talking absolute nonsense if you think I'm some kind of public school toff. Free education. Education is the greatest enabler we have to allow people to move on in life, to allow for successful, rewarding careers and a high quality life. We have to find a way of being able to afford university education, because the way things are at the moment, the market is broken. We are now giving free tuition to Scottish but not English students, and as a result fewer Scots are being allowed into the universities because the system cannot afford them. Now that is fundamentally wrong, and we need an equitable, preferably pan-UK solution to this that would allow people to go to university regardless of their economic well-being, and to make sure that the poverty gap is genuinely closed.
Wendy Chamberlain?
Nope.
Or would you wish to respond to that?
Sorry?
Do you wish to respond to that?
What to that? I just did, no.
No? Okay. Wendy Chamberlain.
Thanks very much, and good luck with the rest of your career. Yeah, I think there are a number of issues there. I mean, obviously as a Liberal Democrat, you don't expect me maybe to talk about tuition fees, but I think there is that aspect around where we may have free tuition fees, but we have had cuts to grants and bursaries, and as a result of that, living costs are such that students have to leave with debt. The other thing is sad that one of the things I did for a year was I worked in further education. I was a communications lecturer at Fife College, and I think one of the other sad things is that we have many graduate level jobs, but we also have jobs where we don't need to have graduates, or we have graduates going into jobs where graduate qualifications aren't expected. And I think the cuts to further education have been quite, and vocational courses have been quite damaging as well. But just to reiterate in terms of we obviously spoke to some of the strikers when we were coming into here tonight. I think there is that issue around casualisation. We want people to have rewarding, fulfilling careers where they can potentially, this is a university town in many respects that relies on the university across a number of levels, and we want to ensure that people can make their homes here, and we need to make sure that we remunerate our academics appropriately as well. So even if you do accrue some degree of debt, that you have the means by which to pay it back.
Thank you. Wendy Haynes.
I'm intrigued that Tony wants to equalise access to higher education across the UK. I believe they are not offering tuition fees to be wiped out, as Labour Party is in England. So the Labour Party is committed to not charging tuition fees for anybody in the UK to study at university.
Thank you. Now, we've had a very enjoyable evening. We have time for one more question, and we're going to base that on a friendly local note. So if I could ask Henry Bohr if he's in. Okay. He's upstairs? Nope. I'll ask that. Oh, sorry. Apologies. Sorry. Can't see the wood for the trees. I'd just like to wait for the microphone.
Actually, I did have a couple of questions in my email, so which one?
Indeed, yes. It's the North East Fife We All Love one.
Oh, perfect. Yes, well, it's quite short and sweet. We all love North East Fife. Could the candidates tell us what they enjoy most about living here?
Wendy Haynes.
I love the countryside. I'm very keen on walking. I hasten to add, I'm not a super energetic hill walker, but I love just going for walks, and I've been doing the Fife Pilgrim Way, which I've enjoyed tremendously, because not only am I getting a good walk, but I'm learning about the history of Fife and seeing some really interesting countryside. So yeah, for me that's really good. I I love trees particularly. So I'm really pleased the Labour Party is going to plant loads of trees.
Thank you, Wendy. Tony McClinskey. Tony?
When I was going out with my girlfriend at the age of 16, 17 in Dundee, we used to come through at St Andrews to go somewhere posh and pleasant. The girl's now my wife, 47 years later, and when we were thinking about where we should settle after I left the Navy, North East Fife was right slap bang in our target range, and we're lucky enough to live just outside Ceres. We've got St Andrews 15 minutes down the road with golf courses, which I'm a member of. We've got Dundee and Edinburgh within 45 minutes travel. This is a fantastic place to live. The range of the countryside and access to the best of that Scotland has to offer, both in golf and the civilised environment of Edinburgh and St Andrews, is just fantastic.
Thank you. Wendy Chamberlain.
I think there's two things I love most about North East Fife. First of all is the history. So one of the things that I took somebody to look at a couple of weeks ago was in Ladybank, and there's a plaque there for when Asquith was the Liberal MP for here, and he used to get off the train at Ladybank, make a speech and get back on. And there is the fact that we've never had a female MP representing this constituency, so it would be lovely to have the opportunity to do so. The second one is that my sport is shinty. And I play for a team in another part of Fife, but I love the fact that St Andrews University has male and female shinty teams, and I've had the opportunity to play here.
Thank you. And Stephen?
Well, on the sporting level, I love the fact that St Andrews hosts Dundee United, and that's where they train. But that's quite specialist and might split the audience as well. I love the fact I've got two small kids, and we've got so much space to run around, and I live just outside St Andrews, but I think a particularly special bit about living just outside St Andrews and St Andrews itself, I love the fact that this place is so diverse with people from throughout the world and of different backgrounds, and that makes this place really, really, really special. People make St Andrews. There you go, to Nick Glasgow's.
Marvellous, thank you very much. I'm afraid that is all we have time for. Thank you for braving the elements and coming down, and there will be a write-up in tomorrow's Courier. Thank you.